We are here at Capclave 2010, and the guests, some of the guests of honor are Ann and Jeff VanderMeer, and I have them here with us. With me now is Ann VanderMeer. Ann, welcome to Fast Forward.
Thank you, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
And you are a publisher, you're an editor, which is we don't get a lot of here. Mostly it's those writer types. Mm-hmm. How did you get started in editing and publishing?
Oh gosh, I got started, it was back in the late 80s. A girlfriend of mine and I decided we were really interested in reading speculative fiction magazines, Twilight Zone, all those magazines were out. And we thought, wouldn't it be fun to start our own? It was one of those kind of things, like, let's start our own.
Let's put on a show.
Right, exactly. And we were thinking, oh, it'll be so much fun, it'll be easy, and we'll do so much better than these guys. Well, rude awakening, but we learned a lot, and that was a great experience for me, starting a magazine with someone, and then it turned over, I ended up doing it by myself, expanding into books. And so I published a couple of books as well under my press, Buzz City Press, and I had a really good time doing it. And the reason why I got into it is because I love reading so much, so that's what started it.
It's a good way to get into it. This way you get to read a lot.
Yes,
so,
it's a passion.
Yeah, Buzz City Press, how long has that been going on? What kind of things do you look for?
Well, Buzz City Press, I'm really not publishing under Buzz City Press anymore. I'm doing other projects with other publishers, because one of the things that I learned all those years that I was running my own publishing company is that some of the day-to-day business stuff wasn't as much fun to me as the actual reading of the stories and doing that kind of work. So now the projects that I work on, I work for other publishers. They contract me to do different anthology projects or books or magazines or what have you. And so Buzz City is not really publishing now.
It isn't publishing now. And you moved into editing. Mm-hmm. And you are, what, fiction editor with Weird Tales?
I'm actually now the editor-in-chief.
Oh.
So I've been promoted and enjoying that very much. Just started doing that this year, although I was their fiction editor since 2007. And I now have all-female staff, which is kind of unusual. It's the first time in the history of Weird Tales that the main staff people are female. My art director is Mary Robinette Cowell, and my nonfiction editor is Paula Garan. So the three of us, are now representing Weird Tales under the leadership of John Betancourt, who runs Wallside Press. So
yeah, and I play poker with him.
Oh, do you? Is he any good?
He's pretty good.
Is he?
Actually.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I won't play poker with him.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. I wouldn't recommend it. So with Weird Tales as editor-in-chief, what's a day like for an editor-in-chief of a magazine like that? Because I don't know if a lot of people that watch the show are that aware of what a magazine editor does.
Well, we spend a lot of time in correspondence and in reading, and just dealing with a lot of different activities like that. It's important, though, that when you're actually reading the fiction, that you want to set aside quiet time where you're not being distracted, because it's very easy when you're on the computer to have all kinds of distractions coming in. You get pinged for an email and something pretty is over there and you want to go look at it, So it's very important, just as much as it is for a writer to be focused on their writing, an editor really needs to be focused on the reading, because that's our skill, is we're reading in the same professional manner that a writer is writing.
And so when you get a story, you read it, you like it, you then, I guess, negotiate for getting it in the magazine.
Well, what I always do is I always read a story more than once before I make a final decision. So if I read a story and I think that it's really interesting, I'll set it aside and I'll read it a second time to see if it still has the same weight as the first time. And then if it does, then I contact the writer. We make arrangements for publishing it. We go through, if there's any edits need to be made, we work back and forth. I turn it over to Mary, and she finds the art that will go with it. We decide which issue it's going to go in. And then we also look at how that story fits in with the other stories, because we want to make sure that every single issue makes sense. And I'm not talking about theme issues per se, but I'm talking about how the stories flow together from one to the other. So I do spend a lot of time, I work very hard on making sure that every single issue makes sense and how I order the stories.
Now that's really interesting. What kind of things do you look for in putting together the order the stories are in the magazine, what mix you get in an issue?
Well, it changes from issue to issue, because you never know how everything is going to fall out. But once I've decided which stories I'm going to put into an issue, I'm looking at, serious, silly, this type, that type, short, long, because you don't want to have a bunch of short stories next to each other, a bunch of long stories next to each other. You want to mix it up. You want to have variety because you don't want to fatigue the reader. If they're going to pick up the magazine and start reading it from the beginning to the end, you want to make sure that they're not going to get worn out by reading the same type of thing. So you're not going to have stories that are similar back to back. You might not even have them in the same issue. You want to give them enough variety that they're amazed by this story and they go to the next one and, wow, that one's really cool too, but it's completely different, you know. So you want to have that kind of a mix. It's the same philosophy that my husband and I use when we put together our anthology projects.
Right. Well, let's talk about that some, because you, with your husband, you've worked on anthologies with steampunk and what the new weird.
Yep.
And you've also done some of those little silly books, what Thackeray Lamb's Head and the kosher animals,
Right, kosher animals.
and all
Yes.
that, which are just delightful things.
Well, thank you.
What is it that you think, kind of, why steampunk has come up and has gotten so big suddenly?
Well, I think it's very attractive for a lot of reasons. I think that steampunk, although it has a very finite definition, I think it's very broad-based. I think that you can approach steampunk from so many different points of view that it's attractive to a lot of people. You can make it something that's very fun and entertaining, but yet it can also have deeper levels as well and speak to, you know, social responsibility and what's going on in the world and, you know, war and poverty, famine, that type of thing. I think you can address all those issues with steampunk the same way you could with science fiction. And but I also think that it brings out a lot of people's desire to have their hands on something, because steampunk is also about do-it-yourself and making things on your own and your own creativity, because it's also a lot about invention. And I think people that don't do that, they still are embraced by it and they still enjoy it. They want to be involved somehow, even though they might not be a maker or a craftsman or a fashion designer or something like that. The whole idea of it is just so embracing to them.
And it's got some great stories coming out of it. Yeah.
Wonderful stories, wonderful stories.
Yeah. And then you've also worked on the new weird, which is another kind of subgenre coming along, really different from steampunk, I think.
Yes, the new weird is coming from a darker point of view. It's like an urban secondary world type of dark fantasy, where you're dealing with those kinds of transgressive issues as and more political, I guess, in some cases, but also more emotional than you might find in some other types of fiction. And I think that you see it's not just one thing. I think with steampunk you can look at something and say, yes, it's a steampunk story, but I think new weird is more of a nebulous idea, and I think in many cases it was more of a marketing term than it was actually a literary movement. Yeah,
because steampunk it's very definable. You can read something, almost see a cover, you know, and you see the goggles and you see the airships. Oh, that's steampunk. New weird, it's weird. So you know, it's by the definition, it's going to be harder to define distinctly.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mixture of literary mainstream with dark fantasy and even horror. You kind of can put it into that way. So if you were thinking in terms of slipstream with science fiction, this is like slipstream with dark fantasy in a way.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of a almost interstitial kind of
because you have the mixing of the genres.
Yeah, all mixing. I like a lot of it. Of course, I like the old weird too.
Yeah, me too.
So, well, I want to thank you for coming by. I'm going to talk to your husband, Jeff, in just a minute. But thank you for taking time out of the schedule to talk with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Mike.